I am glad you're here. And I trust that even if I can't see you, you can see me and that you're with us. You're with us. So as I'm looking around, I'm trying to gauge whether we have some new faces here, which we might. So let me do a 90-second Talmud 101. And if you've heard this now once or twice, you'll forgive me. Or maybe you'll appreciate the recap. I don't know. So Talmud 101, just as a reminder, what is the Talmud? Let's do this on one foot, as they say. Here we go. First, we have the Torah, 5 books of Moses, 613 commandments, right? Are those commandments crystal clear, or is there ambiguity? Ambiguity, lots of ambiguity. The classic example of you shall not cook a calf in its mother's milk. What in the world does that mean? How do I translate that into my own life? What does it mean to keep kosher in real time? When I'm walking down the aisle at Whole Foods, what in the world am I supposed to put in my cart? There's ambiguity in the Torah around the commandments. So along comes a rabbi centuries later named Yehuda Hanassi, and he's living as the Second Temple was recently destroyed. And that's important. So that centralized place of sacrifice and community is now gone, as is effectively the Judaism of the Torah. Now the Jews are going to scatter, and we're going to replace the priests who oversaw the sacrifices with rabbis. And we're going to replace that big centralized temple with these little outposts called synagogues. And rather than connect with God through ritual sacrifice, we're going to connect with God through things like prayer and tikkun olam and tzedakah and all the things that we do. We today live something called rabbinic Judaism. That's what we live. That's what we inherited. So Yehuda Hanassi is living right in the middle of all of this. And he knows that the Torah was vague. He knows that Judaism is changing. And he's fearful that this new Judaism is going to be challenging. And so he writes a guidebook of how to do it. And the best rabbis, in my experience, can put things in nice, clean, simple terms. I'm going to ask people to put themselves on mute, or maybe I can even mute you. And so that guidebook that he creates is called the Mishnah. It consists of 6 volumes, and it covers most Jewish topics. And if the Torah is ambiguous, the Mishnah is very straightforward and clear. And it's meant to show us what exactly to put in our cart at Whole Foods and what to not put in our cart. So that becomes sort of the prevailing Jewish text for a long time, and rabbis will sit and debate it and discuss it for centuries, and wonder out loud about what Yehuda Hanassi meant when he said X or Y. All of those conversations about the Mishnah and around the Mishnah would in time be captured and organized by subject, and that long, rambling, complex document of discussion and conversation on the Mishnah is called the Gemara. The Gemara is the anti-Mishnah. Mishnah is simple, straightforward, clean Hebrew. The Gemara goes from Hebrew to Aramaic. It goes in and out of topic. We go on tangents. When you put the Mishnah and the Gemara together, what you have is a page of Talmud. That's what the Talmud is, Mishnah and Gemara. And the Talmud consists of 63 volumes covering every aspect of Jewish life. It consists of 2,711 pages and close to 2 million words.
Everything all right?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is like whack-a-mole with the muting. Just like, who do I mute next? Okay, so there's much more to be said about what the Talmud is and isn't, but I promised you just a Talmud 101, and that is 101. Any quick questions about what sort of the basic makeup of the Talmud is? And I can help you. We had talked a bit about what assumptions the Talmud makes. And some of those assumptions are that the minority opinion is valuable and should be included on the page. It assumes that every living Jewish soul has the right to practice Judaism, and we should make Judaism accessible. It assumes that we could bring Judaism into every single corner of life, literally every aspect of life. It makes all kinds of important assumptions that we have so much to learn from the past, that we have an obligation to invent and reinvent tradition in every generation to make sure Judaism stays relatable and relevant. For me, the Talmud is the original Reform text. It really is. If you said that to one of our friends in a black hat, they'd fall over. But it would be true nonetheless. A lot of the things that we love about Reform Judaism can very much be found in the Talmud. And I stand by that point of view, and I would defend that point of view to anyone. And which is maybe one of the reasons why it resonates with you, if it does. Okay, good. Talmud 101. Check. Okay, good. Moving on. So imagine my predicament, friends. It is Friday, March 17th. We are in the midst of interesting time in the Jewish calendar, interesting moment in history. Hello. Oh, that's not for me. Okay. Whack-a-mole yet again. We are living complicated, complex, harrowing, and frustrating lives often. There's so much that we're up against every day. What Talmud, what text do I bring to you on a day like this as I mine the many pages of Talmud? What would I bring to you that would make sense on this St. Patrick's Day? So what I chose, I made an executive decision. I chose a Passover related text as we're saying goodbye to Purim and the Purim season. We had a wonderful Purim here at KI. And after Purim, as you know, our attention turns to Passover and preparing for Passover spiritually, emotionally, in the kitchen, in the synagogue, everywhere we go. This sort of preeminent Jewish experience that has us celebrate our liberation. Without our freedom, where would we be? What would we be? So I thought I'd bring you a nice, dare I say, accessible text from the tractate that deals with Passover called Pesachim, from Pesach. And we'll spend some time with it. And we'll see if we're still friends after this. Let's see how this goes, right? Questions, problems? All right, let me share my screen. Don't run away. Don't run away. 1 second. I'm going to get this just right for you. Okay. Wait a minute. It's going to be worth the wait. Here we go. Okay. Now you see my screen. Yes? Yes? Thumbs up? Yeah. So we're in, this is, I use the website Sefaria, like many of us, I think, know and appreciate. And it has every imaginable Jewish text, including the entire Talmud on it. And here we are in Tractate Pesachim. That's the name of tractate. Every page of Talmud has an A side and a B side. And we're looking, at least to start, at page 115B. 115B. Pesachim is one of the longer tractates. Not the longest tractate. That would be tractate, trivia question, Shabbat. A lot to say about Shabbat. The second tractate of the 63. Okay, here we go. I'm going to be our first reader just to kind of keep us moving, okay? And you, the way you communicate with me is through the chat. that's the best way for now. If you call out, that's fine too, but I just might not necessarily see you. So you can go through the chat or you can raise your hand. You can raise your little emoji hand. And let's see how we do. Okay, the dark text is the original quote unquote Talmud text. And the lighter text, if you can make it out, is the modern day editor trying to help us. So remember, as we're looking at these texts, we're looking at texts that are about 1,500 years old, right? So we need an editor to help us to sort of patch it together. So Rava said, this is what he suggested. If one swallowed matzah without chewing it, he has fulfilled his obligation to eat matzah, as he has consumed it, right? One of the mitzvot, one of the obligations on Passover is to eat matzah. It says that in the Torah, right? Remember, Yehuda Hanasi sees a lot of ambiguity. It says, you shall eat matzah. What does that mean? Do you eat it every day? Do you eat it once? What if you just swallow it without chewing it? What if you didn't taste it, right? So according to Rava, even if you don't chew matzah, which by the way is a terrible idea, how would you, don't try to eat matzah without chewing it. You have technically fulfilled your obligation because you've consumed it. That's what's important. However, if one swallowed bitter herbs without chewing them, also probably not the best idea. He has not fulfilled his obligation as he did not taste the bitterness, right? So the obligation regarding the bitter herbs, maror, is to taste the bitterness. Whereas with regard to matzah, it's to consume, right? So with matzah, you eat it however you want, as long as you eat it. But with bitter herbs, you have an obligation to actually taste those bitter herbs, whether you're tasting it out of the gold's jar or the original root, which I think is the way to go. Furthermore, if one swallowed matzah and bitter herbs together, he has fulfilled the obligation of eating matzah, because all you have to do is consume matzah. It doesn't say you have to consume it alone. But he's not fulfilled the obligation of eating bitter herbs, because as we just learned, you have to truly taste the bitter herbs. And if you're eating it with matzah, you're not fully tasting it. So I think that's important. So let's get to the end of the paragraph and then we'll discuss. If one wrapped matzah and bitter herbs in a palm net, in a little lettuce wrap, the thin interlacing of vines that sprouts around a palm tree, and then swallowed them, he has not fulfilled his obligation, even of eating matzah. Because, well, let's think about the because. When matzah and bitter herbs are consumed in this fashion, the matzah does not even touch one's mouth. This is not even considered eating. Okay, so here we have a premise regarding how to eat matzah and how to eat bitter herbs. And this is good for our Talmud 101 because it shows the Talmud fleshing out what the Torah only laid out in these very cursory, very succinct terms. We're just told that we should taste bitter herbs and consume matzah. Here the Talmud's fleshing it out for us and making clear, how do we do that in real time and how do we not do that? And we could think, why is it important that we consume matzah? You could think about that and maybe come up with an answer. Are we by doing that sort of recalling the actions of our ancestors who only could consume matzah at a time and taste the bitter herbs, that we should put ourselves in a place where we feel just a teeny bit of the pain that they might have felt, and some of the harshness and hardship. Of course, there's a sermon to be written here. Maybe someone here wants to write it. Maybe I'm not someone. That there's so much bitterness in life, or there can be such bitterness in life. Why do we actually need the bitter herbs? You know, is there not enough bitterness in life already? and in a life that feels at times hard, politically, culturally, for those of us who appreciate and love justice and equality and peace and partnership, there's so much bitterness. So we could ask, why the bitter herbs? Maybe that would be the fifth of a question that we'd add to the 4 questions. So far, so good, right? So far, so good. Not overly complex yet. Pretty fair. Anything surprising? No, we're good, right? Let's see how we do. Rav Shimi Bar Ashi said, this is all Gemara, by the way, what we're looking at. Matzah must be placed before each and every participant at the Seder. Okay? So picture your Seder. Don't just have the giant stack in the middle of the table, which we all do. Make sure there's an individual matzah or matzah piece in front of everybody. Each participant in a Seder would recline. Remember, we're told to recline on a couch at his own personal table, right? So we're going to get into this. Picture the scene. Everyone has like a little mini table, like one of those TV tables. You know that kind of table that I'm talking about? You know those little mini TV. Imagine you each have one of those in front of you. You each have your own individual setup. You're reclining on the couch. You have your individualized table right in front of you. That sounds pretty nice. That's nice. Especially for those of us who have a billion kids at the Seder and everyone's like on top of each other and hurting each other and grabbing. It's like you have your space, he has his space, everyone leave everyone alone. Okay. Likewise, bitter herbs must be placed before each and every participant, right? So you should also have your own stash of bitter herbs. And charoset must be placed before each and every participant. Why these 3 items? Because they all reference or are referenced in the Torah, right? These are the originals. These are the originals. And during the Seder, before the meal, right, when we're still in Seder mode, one shall remove...
You should be seeing that stuff.
Oh boy, are we all muted?
Okay.
Okay. Make sure you're muted, friends. And during the Seder, before the meal, right, you're in Seder mode. Sorry, I was distracted. One shall remove the table only from before the one reciting the Haggadah. So who's the only one who doesn't have a little mini table in front of them? The leader, right? You picturing this? Okay. I'm just, yeah. Are you all picturing this and you see what I'm saying? More or less. Okay.
Yeah.
So everyone's
Yeah.
at their little mini table. And everyone has their own setup in front of them. And the only one without a table in front of them is the leader. Okay. The other tables, which correspond to the Seder plates used nowadays, are left in place. Right? So you don't have so much a Seder plate. You actually just have these things in front of you. We have all these fancy Seder plates. They didn't really know about that. They thought, these are the items of the Seder. Let me have them right in front of me, whether on a plate or not. Okay? You can picture this sort of, this is a quote unquote original Seder, 1500 years ago, 1700 years ago. This is what a Seder might have looked like. Rav Huna says, all of the aforementioned foods, the matzah, the bitter herbs, the charoset, must also be placed only before the one who recites the Haggadah. Okay. So he has what? His view is the opposite, that the person with this stuff in front of them should be the leader. That's the one who should have this stuff in front of them. Okay. When the time comes to eat these items, all the other participants receive a portion from him, right? This is kind of how Seders often go today. Say, okay, now we're up to the charoset. Let me send around the charoset to everybody. Now we're going to try the matzah. Let's pass around the matzah, right? So it's the leader sort of distributing versus everyone has it beforehand. Does it matter? Is there symbolic meaning in any of this? Can anyone create a sermon out of it? Well, I'll tell you, the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rab Huna. So it says basically the right way to do it is what Rab Huna says, that the leader should be in charge and he should distribute. And let's not leave everything in front of everyone. Why is that the right, why is that the winning argument ultimately? Think about it. Why does it make more sense? And not just spiritually, but logistically. Don't overthink it. What happens if you have all this stuff in front of you and you're 8 years old? Charlotte, I see your hand. You have to unmute, Charlotte.
Yeah, it's just logistically easier,
Yeah.
you know, to have this, as you said, that's what you do at your house. Everybody, there's like a bowl of this and a bowl of that. And when it comes time to do whatever part of the Seder you're in, you just pass it around and everybody gets what they need. For children, I agree with you. It would be crazy. They'd have their stuff all over the place.
Exactly. All of the points that you're saying. Exactly. If they're distracted, they might not hear the Haggadah, right? If they're busy eating and sharing and arguing over the food, they might not actually hear the story or have the opportunity to participate in the telling of the story, right? So we might have made the argument to say, well, this isn't very inclusive and fair. But ultimately it is, because it allows everyone to hear the story equally and participate in the story equally. And that only when we get to the certain moments in the Seder do we try this food or that food. It also points to the fact that a Seder does need a leader, someone to sort of guide. And what they're doing here, again, we take all this for granted, but they're giving a blueprint for how these things should be done amid a time when they're all new, right? This is all new. Think of an exiled people. The Talmud we're looking at is the Babylonian Talmud. We're living far away from Israel now. We shouldn't assume that they know what a Seder should look like. So these rabbis are giving us an outline. Here's what you should do. Here's what makes sense. They're basically saying, look, one time we tried giving everyone their own table and their own food. It went badly. So just from now on, do it this way, right? So there's something very practical going on here. And then only after the fact can we layer on some sort of spiritual symbolic meaning. But in typical Talmud fashion, we're given both points of view, as if to say, look, both of these approaches exist. And in our opinion, they're not telling you you must do it this way. Halacha is the generally accepted way of doing things. It's not a commandment. In our opinion, this is the better way of doing things. Let's keep going. It's going to get good. This is removing the table. I'm going to skip that. Okay. Shmuel said, this is another rabbi, that the phrase, the bread of affliction, that's a phrase we all know. Bread of affliction coming from the Torah, lechem oni, right? It really means the poor person's bread. Means bread over which one answers matters. They're playing on this word onim, because this is also the same root word of to answer. And absolutely there's a sermon here, right? This is the bread which allows us to answer some important questions. How did we escape? When did we escape? How did they survive their escape? That was also taught in a Braita. Braita is a very old text from the time of the Mishnah that wasn't included in the Mishnah. That's what the word Braita means. Lechem oni is bread over which one answers many matters, saying, well, we do inherit this teaching. We're not the first ones to say it. Alternatively, in the verse, lechem oni is actually written without a vav, which means a poor person, as I said. Just as it is the manner of a poor person to eat a piece of bread for lack of a whole loaf, so too here he should use a piece of matzah. So they're leaning into this phrase, the bread of affliction, which comes from the Torah. And they're making a little midrash about it, that it's this type of bread over which we answer questions, or around which we answer questions, using the root word to answer. And they're also saying it's the bread of the poor person, using another root word for oni is a poor person, meaning if you are without, right? If you are a slave or a servant, you are not going to have a big luxurious loaf of bread. This is what you're probably going to have, something sort of small and meager like this. So the matzah takes on loaded meaning in those ways. I'm just pausing to look at commentary. I see, okay, so I see Jonathan feels patriarchal. Karen, it says, there's an order to the service and it allows the Seder to flow correctly. So let me speak to both comments. It is a little patriarchal. I mean, the Talmud knows only men in charge. That's the speaking of assumptions. And they would only imagine a male leading the Seder. And of course, we, thank God, have moved past such thinking. And Karen's right that the word Seder means order. And if they left it to sort of everyone creating their own sort of retelling of the Exodus, there would be no community, there would be no harmony. There needs to be some standard that binds us together. And they're trying desperately to sort of maintain that standard, even as they allow for diversity, which is what we do still. They were fearful that Judaism would go away in this sort of diaspora, in this sort of new reality of exile. So they desperately are trying to maintain some level of consistency, to Karen's point. So let's keep going. Now we're getting into 116a, as you see. It's going to get really good in a minute. Not to give it all away. Okay, I don't want to get you excited, but it's about to get good, okay? Do not leave now. Don't go anywhere. Okay, so just as the manner of a poor person is that he heats the oven and his wife bakes quickly, speaking of patriarchal, before the small amount of wood they have is used up, so too here when baking matzah, he heats the oven and his wife bakes quickly, right? So the manner of even making the matzah is similar to how you would make something if you didn't have much money. You only have so much wood, you only have so much fire, you only have so much time. So there is a similarity there. And this is why matzah is called the poor man's bread. It is meant to be a humbling experience to eat matzah. It's meant to remind us of our humble origins. It's meant to remind us of how far we've come, right? That we have access to food and to meals and to a plethora of things at our disposal that our people just never had. And certainly our Egyptian ancestors, Israelite ancestors living in Egypt never had. Okay, we're going to keep going until I see more questions. The Mishnah states that they bring the charoset to the leader of the Seder. Although eating charoset is not a mitzvah, we're not commanded to eat the charoset. And the Gemara asks, here we go, if it's not a mitzvah, for what reason do you bring it to the Seder? Why is it at the Seder? Why is it so important? And here Rabbi Ami said it is brought due to the poison in the bitter herbs. It's a strong word, which is neutralized by the charoset. The charoset exists to soften the bitterness. That's why it exists, according to Ami. And in this regard, Rav Asi said the remedy for one who ate the poison in lettuce is to eat a radish, right? You have to offset the bitterness with something. The remedy for the poison in a radish is leeks. The remedy for the poison in leeks is hot water. A remedy for the poison in all vegetables, hot water. So they're basically saying that the mixture of haroset can help us undo the bitterness. So let me ask you a question. This is an honest question. Why the haroset? We're supposed to taste the bitterness, right? We're supposed to imagine that we personally had left Egypt, that even just for a moment, we're supposed to put ourselves in their place. Why haroset? They didn't have haroset. They did not have sweetness. Oh my God, I stumped 30 people with one question. I can't believe that. I see a hand. Where do I see a hand? Eve, help us, Eve.
Because we're supposed. Am I unmuted?
I hear you.
Yeah, okay. Because we're supposed to feel like we have gone through slavery, through redemption, and that we are no
Yes.
longer slaves.
Good. We're not slaves. The story is one of liberation. The story is one of ultimate freedom. Shelley, were you going to say something?
The word freedom.
We're celebrating our freedom. We sit in freedom. We celebrate in freedom.
It's
Charlie,
the
you were going to say.
counterbalance. It's
Go
the
ahead, Shelley.
It's the counterbalance, right? Through the hard times and the bitterness. And now after the bitterness comes freedom. And freedom is sweet.
Beautiful. That's nice. Charlotte, were you going to say something? You're on mute. No. Karen.
I think it represents hope also, that amid the bitterness, there's always that sweetness, that looking, the longing or the presence of hope as you move forward.
Nice.
It also
nice.
tastes good. It also tastes good.
I love haroset. Yeah, I think that's it. The Seder is not meant to be dour. It's not meant to be this sort of solemn experience. Yes, we're supposed to acknowledge our past and recognize the pains that we've experienced as a people. But the Seder does then come to a place of hopefulness and joy. The fact that we are a free people, that we survived not only Pharaoh, but every Pharaoh through history. Thank God. And that we get to now eat in peace and in community and in joy. We can live lives of Torah. So hence charoset. Also the charoset with the bitterness reminds us that life is both sweet and sour. And thank God it's not all sour. And it would be unrealistic to expect it to be all sweet. Okay, let's keep going. The clock is ticking, my friends, as it generally does. I see Shelley. What about the cup of wine and hope? Yeah, let's see if we get to the 4 cups. 4 cups. 4 cups of wine, Shelley, are in reference to the fourfold promise that God made to the Israelites. I will take you out. I will free you. I will take you to my people. I'll show you to the promised land. 4 promises made amid the Exodus story, and thus 4 cups of wine. Okay. So now quoting back to the Mishnah, which was many pages earlier, we didn't see it. Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Tzadok, says that eating charoset is a mitzvah. So, oh boy, this is controversial. The Torah does not say that. And here we have a rabbi saying, actually, it's a mitzvah. And the Gemara asks, what is the nature of this mitzvah? How is this a mitzvah? How do you come to that conclusion? Rabbi Levi says, it's in remembrance of the apple, as apple is one of the ingredients in charoset. And the verse states, Song of Songs, which you're meant to read on Passover, incidentally, Shir HaShirim. Who is this who comes up from the wilderness, reclining upon her beloved? Under the apple tree I awakened you. All right, we're going to need a little more help on this one, which is an allusion to the Jewish people leaving Egypt. that actually charoset and apple is something that specifically can be tethered to the Exodus story. It's a reach. Rabbi Yochanan says the charoset actually is in remembrance of the mortar. This is the explanation that we generally used by the Jews for their slave labor in Egypt. That's the explanation we often use and many of us grew up with, right? Abai said, therefore, to fulfill both opinions, right? Nobody is excluded. Nobody is deemed wrong. One must prepare it tart and one must prepare it thick. This is the Talmud talking to you now. One must prepare it tart in remembrance of the apple, Song of Songs, and one must prepare it thick in remembrance of the mortar. Just as the charoset is a mixture of sweet and sour and nuts and apples and all sorts of things, so is the charoset a mixture of biblical references. That's cool, right? I think that's fascinating. That the one taste is for this biblical moment, the other taste is for this biblical moment. It's meant to capture in its own way the Jewish experience, sweet and sour, high and low, tears of joy, tears of sadness. This is the Talmudic commentary on charoset. Lest you wondered whether the Talmud doesn't touch on every aspect of everything. Okay, the text I'm hoping to focus on, we haven't even gotten to yet, but and it's not looking good. Okay, so let's see. It was taught in a Braita. Yeah, it was taught in a Braita, and now we know what a Braita is. Old text from the time of the Mishnah, not included in the Mishnah. In accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, the spices used in the charoset are in remembrance of the hay that our forefathers used for building in Egypt. The charoset itself is in remembrance of the mortar. So here's a different view of what the elements of the charoset represent. Rabbi Eliezer, son of Rabbi Tzadok, and you see another assumption we can make here is that we should always remember who we come from, right? So everyone's the son of, the daughter of, the grandson of someone. And with every teaching and statement, you're not speaking only for yourself, you're speaking for those who came before you and those who taught you. You're an amalgam of them. I mean, the sermon would really be just as the charoset is an amalgam of biblical references and flavors and emotions, so are we. We are all charoset. That's the sermon. Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Tzadok, said, when selling charoset, the small shopkeepers in Jerusalem would say as follows: come and take spices for yourselves for the mitzvah. Putting a final stamp on the idea that charoset is a mitzvah, even if it's never said so explicitly. For our sake, it doesn't matter whether it's a mitzvah or not. We include it in our Seder regardless. And now we sort of have touched on why it becomes extra special and meaningful. Elaine, Middle East recipes don't include apples, right? There's 1,000 charoset recipes. You can go down the rabbit's hole on that one. Of it, every charoset recipe speaks to a different culture and timeline and point of view. That alone would be a thesis. Okay, we finally got to the text. That was all part of your appetizer, as it were. Now we have Mishnah, short and sweet. And you can see in the Hebrew, it's always clear that we're starting Mishnah. This is Aramaic for how Mishnah would be written. The attendants poured the second cup for the leader of the Seder. And here the son asks his father the questions about the differences between Passover and a regular night. After the second cup, we get to the 4 questions as we understand them. Let's see how the Talmud understands them. And if the son does not have the intelligence to ask the questions on his own, his father teaches him the questions, right? So again, this is Mishnah. This is a very, very old text. Oh, Rachel, I see your point. Yeah, well, they're living in, it's unclear whether they're including apples, whether apples are native. If you've been to Israel, you see apples in Israel, and they're living in Babylonia as they're writing all this. So it's unclear whether how abundant apples would be in Babylonia. So let's think about 4 questions here. So the premise originally is that the son should ask his father about the difference between Passover and other nights. There's no formula. There's no script. You should just ask. This is the place where we should ask. And we should begin a kind of dialogue. And if the son does not have the intelligence, that's, I think, a little harsh. If the son's unable to ask, let's say that, his father teaches him the question. So only in that case should we turn to the script that exists and say, okay, well, if you don't have the questions to ask, let me present a couple of questions that could be appropriate here. And incidentally, it doesn't say intelligence, it says da'at, which is really knowledge. The im ein da'at, which also sounds a little bit better than intelligence to me. So, well, what's that script? What are the questions that the father should effectively feed the son? The Mishnah lists the questions. You're going to know this. Why is this night different from all other nights? As on all other nights, we eat leavened bread and matzah, if you prefer. Maybe you do. On this night, all our bread is matzah, right? So far, this sounds very familiar to us. These are the 4 questions that we know. And of course, the 4 questions are not 4 questions. It's 1 question, followed by a series of answers. On all other nights, we eat other vegetables. On this night, we eat bitter herbs. Right? So far, so good. The Mishnah continues its list of questions. When the temple was standing, one would ask, on all other nights, we eat either roasted, stewed, or cooked meat, but on this night, we eat only the roasted meat of the Paschal lamb. The final question was asked, even after the destruction of the temple, on all other nights, we dip the vegetables in a liquid during the meal once. However, on this night, we dip twice. So that formula is pretty close to what we inherit today, right? That looks pretty familiar. What's missing? Where are my AP students? Reclining, right? Reclining. Is that what you're going to say? Yes. Okay, I knew you were. You're all my AP students. Okay, so those are the questions that are sort of created ahead of time in the event, only in the event that the son, or I'm going to say children, can't or are unable or aren't ready, are too young, maybe are physically unable to ask the questions. Only then do you turn to the script. A far cry from the big show that we put on today with the youngest asking these questions. No mention of the youngest here, which is interesting. And maybe we want to pause there for 1 second and think about how, at least at its core, the Seder wasn't meant to be overly formulaic. Formulaic, but not overly formulaic. It should be conversational. It should be educational. It shouldn't be all scripted. It should be personalized, right? As the kids ask, so the parents answer. Is it a commentary on us? Do we need the script now? There's something to think about. And according to the intelligence and ability of the son, his father teaches him about the Exodus. I think that's a good line. What is that line saying? Come on. Charlotte, help us, Charlotte.
Well, it depends on the age of the child and obviously the knowledge of the child. So if you have a 5-year-old child, you're saying one thing. If you have a 12-year-old child, you're going to teach it differently.
It's also, thank you, Charlotte. It's also acknowledging that kids are different. Our kids are different. And I think we know that to be true. They come with different passions and different interests and different skill sets. They're not one mold. I mean, even within our own households, I have 3 kids. They're like each from a different planet. They're just such different people. And to think that the same answer would work for all 3 of them is ludicrous, right? So this is a very early nod to inclusion and all the language we have today around inclusion. Different types of learners, different types of teachers, that let's seek to provide for each student as befits them. And let's be cognizant, right? Daughters are excluded. I know, Rachel, I know. This is the Talmud, I know. When we rewrite the Talmud, you and me, it's going to say kids. It's going to say children. And this is the text that we inherit. They just didn't know. It's just not how they approach the world. And that said, there are some redeeming moments in the Talmud of women of great strength and great wisdom who are given the spotlight, but it's just not enough. Rachel, I'm with you. So this line's just so important, that we as parents have to acknowledge that our kids are different. We as teachers have to acknowledge that kids are coming from different places, that we can't be cookie cutter in anything we do. When teaching his son about the Exodus, he begins with the Jewish people's disgrace and concludes with their glory, which is also tough language, right? We're beginning with hardship and heartache in Egypt, and we're ending with freedom and standing atop Mount Sinai to receive our own Torah. It goes from a very difficult place to a rather wonderful place. And he expounds from the passage, "An Aramean tried to destroy my father." That's not really, this is me struggling a little bit with some of these translations, right? My father was a wandering Aramean. It begins with the beginning. The declaration one recites when presenting his first fruits at the temple until he concludes explaining the entire section, right? So you really should tell the full story, is what it's saying. This piece here this is sort of the essence of the Seder right here, that it exists in order to convey to our kids how we got here. So that's all Mishnah. That's Mishnah, paragraph 1, 2, 3. Now the Gemara is going to take all that and turn it inside out, upside down. That's what the Gemara does. Peeking at the clock. Oh my God. It's 11:52. All right. The sages taught, if his son is wise and knows how to inquire, his son asks. If he's not super wise, his wife asks, right? Someone should ask, what are we doing here? Why is this night different from all other nights? And even if his wife is not capable of asking, or if he has no wife, he should ask himself. That question should be uttered out loud. Why are we doing this? Why is this night different from all other nights? And even if 2 Torah scholars who know all the rules of Passover and don't need to ask any questions, if they're sitting together and there's no one else present to pose the questions, they should ask each other. Which I think it's just looks like it would be like the most adorable cartoon to picture that scene to me. These 2 rabbis sitting there and saying, why are we here? Okay, so no matter the size of the Seder, no matter who's in attendance, someone needs to say out loud, even if you're sitting by yourself, Ma nishtana. The Mishnah states that one of the questions is, why is this night different from all other nights? As on all other nights, we dip once. However, on this night, we dip twice. Rava strongly objects to this statement. Is that to say that on every other day there is no alternative but to dip once? Is there an obligation to dip at all on other days, as indicated by the wording of the Mishnah? Rather, Rava said that this is what the Mishnah is teaching. On all other nights, we are not obligated to dip even once. However, on this night, we are obligated to dip twice, which is the language we land on, right? Because you might have thought on every other night of the year, we must dip once, like chips and guac. But actually, that's not what it's saying. It's saying that on all other nights of the year, we're never obligated to dip at all. On this night, not only we're obligated to dip 2 times. What are the 2 dips? This is my dipping. Parsley into salt water, bitter herbs into charoset. Those are the 2. Rava strongly objects to this explanation. Is it obligatory for the children, right? They say we, everyone. As previously mentioned, the reason one dips twice is to encourage the children to ask questions. Maybe we're just dipping to have them ask questions. It's sort of a strange thing, especially if you're not used to doing it. How can this be called an obligation? Right? Because a mitzvah would only apply to someone who's an adult, who's over 13. So how can you obligate a child? Rather, Rav Safra said that this is what the Mishnah is teaching. We do not normally dip even once. However, on this night, we do dip twice. This wording is preferable as it indicates the performance of an optional act. It's not a mitzvah. Okay. Looking at the chat, looking at questions. Arlene, I see your comment, inclusion of males, but not inclusion of daughters. Yeah, I mean, this is, I know, friends, I'm with you. If only the Talmud were an incredibly modern, inclusive document. It's not. This is not the Judaism that they knew. This is not the time that they lived in. And thank God we're here to right those wrongs. That's one of the reasons we're here. It's taught in the Mishnah that the father begins his answer with disgrace and concludes with glory. We said that, right? That it starts with hardship and ends with joy. The Gemara asks, what do you mean disgrace? What disgrace? Rava said that one should begin by saying, at first our forefathers were idol worshipers. That's the disgrace that we knew. Abraham's father was an idol worshiper, as we're taught. And it should conclude with words of glory. Shmuel says the disgrace actually is the fact that we were slaves, right? So there's a lot of hardship in our past. When you say we should begin with hardship, which hardship do you really mean? The hardship in this case is slavery. All right, I'm pushing us all the way. Rav Nachman said to his servant Daru, we do sometimes see appearances by figures like this. We see it with Rabbi Gamliel's servant too, whose name was Tabi. With regard to a slave who is freed by his master, who gives him gold and silver, what should the slave say to him? It feels condescending to be saying this to the servant. Daru said to him, he must thank and praise his master. He said to him, if so, you have exempted us from reciting the question of why is this night different? Right? So if your master were to free you, you would of course be very thankful and you would offer thanks. And that's what we're doing here at the Seder. The fact that he uses Daru here as a prop is very uncomfortable. He's trying to make a point as to how a servant might act when freed. Let me pause there. It's a lot. I tried to take us as far as possible. And we could have gone further. Now it's going to get into the 3 sort of elements of Passover that are a must. The Paschal lamb, the matzah, and the bitter herbs. And how you have to incorporate all 3 into your Seder in order for it to be a Seder. That's what we're not going to get to. Here we are. Okay. 11:59. Did I talk too fast? Did I say too much? Who's confused? Who's frustrated?
When do we eat? Isn't that the next question?
Yeah, when do we eat? That's the fifth question. That's the fifth question. So Charlotte, go ahead, Charlotte.
Yeah, my question is not specific to this tractate, but it's a general question. We read Torah and we start at the beginning and we go to the end. Okay. What about when we study Talmud? Is there a specific order to read, or can you kind of pull things out and discuss what you're interested in at any particular time?
Well, my invitation to you is study Talmud anytime, anywhere, anyhow. But there are those who participate in a practice called Daf Yomi, where you start at the beginning and you read a page a day. And it takes 7.5 years to complete the whole Talmud. And the people who are on that path are always on the same page together. It's a sort of a united in process, like the portion of the week that we're doing what every other synagogue is doing. I do Daf Yomi. I'm in my second cycle of Daf Yomi. So I read the whole Talmud, 7 years. And now I'm in year 4 of the second cycle. You start at the beginning with Tractate Brachot, and you go all the way through page by page by page. You're supposed to read 1 page every day. Sometimes I miss a day and I read 2 pages the next day. Sometimes I miss 2 days and then I try to read through. It's not perfect. But that's why if you ever walk into my office, you see my tractate right on my desk. So it reminds me to start my day with this, which I always do. I wouldn't encourage Daf Yomi until you feel kind of comfortable with Talmud, but I love it and it's a part of my day. It brings me calm. It brings me insight. It, sometimes it's just a distraction from the noise of the world, and sometimes it's inspiring. Usually it's somewhere in between. So I hope this was interesting and fun. We sort of took a close look at some of the elements of Passover as we're all starting to think about Passover. I think the takeaway sermon is about the charoset, and that's something I'm going to be thinking about as I move through my day now. How the meaning of the charoset, the bitterness and the sweetness, that it would be so easy to feel that life is so bitter and hard. We wake up to painful news every day. We go online, there's painful news. So it goes without saying, there's bitterness in our world, there's bitterness in our past. But remember the sweetness too. The sweetness that exists in your life and in our collective lives. You can't forget that either, that it is there, and thank God it is. Speaking of, I just want to make sure everyone absolutely knows that they're invited to our son Elijah. Bar mitzvah. Speaking of Passover, he was born during Passover, hence Elijah. April 1st. April 1st, here at KI, followed by a big luncheon for all of us. I'd love to see you there. Okay? Shabbat Shalom, friends. Great being with you. It's great being with you.
Shabbat Shalom.
Email me, text me
Shalom.
with
Thank
questions,
you.
problems. I'll see you at services. I'll see you at Torah study. I'll see you around, okay? Take good care. Shabbat
Thank you.
Shalom.
Thank
Shabbat
you.
Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, everybody. Take good care.